Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're here for the Demilitarize PGH, Ending the Exchange of Violent Police Practices from Pittsburgh to Palestine, you are in the right spot. We're gonna maybe give it 2 or 3 seconds more to let people into the room. But we're incredibly grateful for your time here. We know there are a lot of really great sessions happening right now, so thank you for your time. My name is Crystal Knight. I'm the community organizer for the Thomas Merton Center, and I'm going to give some of our presenters here the opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm going to kick it off to Darnika.
Hi, my name is Darnika Reed. I'm an education rights advocate and organizer. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and also the Pittsburgh Coalition to End the Deadly Exchange. And I'll get you over to my friend Dan Galvin.
You're muted, Dan.
All right, let's try that again from the top. My name is Dan Galvin. I'm the communications coordinator for the local chapter of Veterans for Peace, Western Pennsylvania. My pronouns are he, him. I'm very glad to be here with you today. And now I will pass it over to my colleague, Donnie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donnie Klein. I'm one of the co-founders of the Pittsburgh chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace and part of the Coalition to End the Deadly Exchange. Very glad to be here with you all. And now I'm going to pass it to Christine. Christine,
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christine Mohammed. I'm the Executive Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is here in Pittsburgh. We are very proud and honored to be a part of the Coalition to End the Deadly Exchange, and thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll pass it to Emily.
Hi, I am Emily Deferrari. I'm a volunteer with the Pittsburgh Coalition to End the Deadly Exchange, and I'm here just to be participating in the breakout groups. Glad to have you all here.
And I believe Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe. My pronouns are he, him. I'm here with the Pittsburgh Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm looking forward to spending the afternoon with you guys.
All right, so Christine and Emily are going to be monitoring the chat. So if any questions come up, they'll keep track of those so that we can get to them at the end. So what are we here to talk about today? So we're going to talk about what our campaign is. You know, we're going to ask, you know, why is this relevant to Pittsburgh? We're going to look at what the coalition has done so far. We're going to talk about what we are up to now and what we're working towards. And lastly, most importantly, we're going to talk about how you can get involved. So next slide, please. So we're going to be utilizing some community agreements here. I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with some of these, but maybe this is your first type of breakout session that you'll be having with us. So the first one is step up, step back. So for our step up, if you're someone who usually waits for someone else to speak first, or you're not usually really chatty during these sort of breakout rooms, like challenge yourself to speak up here and ask questions with us. And if you're someone who's really comfortable sharing in large groups and you find that you're talking, you're talking more than others, maybe take a moment to step back to let folks who have a little bit of a harder time doing that. One diva, one mic is pretty simple. When someone has the mic, let's let them finish their thought. We're gonna make sure that we're doing that though with the third one. It's one of my favorite new community agreements I've learned. It's landing the plane. So in order to not interrupt one another, let's make sure that we are wrapping up our points. Sometimes when I don't know how to end exactly what I'm saying, I'll just say the end, I'm done. You know, that works. And 4 is power is always at play. So we know here at the summit, and even with these sort of community agreements, that there's always power at play. That power always leans towards white and male and cis and able-bodied. So we want to make sure you understand that we're going to be using a progressive stack when we're calling on people. We're going to be, doing our best whether or not you have your camera on and off to be prioritizing people of color, prioritizing femmes or women or non-binary folk. And we are also going to just, feel free to raise your hand regardless of how you identify, but we're going to be doing that also to make sure that we're calling on people who haven't yet gotten the chance to speak. And last, facilitator call in and redirection. We are here with a very clear and specific argument about why this matters to us here in Pittsburgh. So if we feel that someone is speaking and veering us off of the spirit of this presentation, we are going to redirect y'all. So before we get started, we're going to do some icebreakers. And the first one's going to be a little lighter since we've been doing a lot. I'm sure y'all have been doing a lot of other heavy presentations, but in the chat, write down what was the best TV show you have binge watched during the pandemic. I know I am very guilty of watching lots of good TV. So what's one of the best ones? And we can see what we have in common, maybe see some shows that get to be recommended. So The Good Place, great show. Avatar: The Last Airbender, also been watching, great. I've heard a lot of good things about Schitt's Creek as well. The Expanse, The Witcher. I know there are so many. The Peaky Blinders, I've never heard of that one. Grey's Anatomy, classic. The Queen's Gambit, I've heard lots of great ones. Your Honor. Kim's Convenience. Any other ones that haven't already been mentioned? Don't be shy. One of our best comfort things to do right now in the pandemic is to stay home and watch some good TV. Bridgerton, see, this is a great way to see what we're all watching together in these times. Yes, very excited for Kim's Convenience. I love it. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to ask folks is, if we get the next question, I can barely see. What do the words police militarization mean to you? And let's keep this as best as you can to one sentence. I know it's kind of hard to wrap that into one sentence, but when you hear police militarization, what comes to mind to you? And it can even just be a couple words. It can be like tanks. Yeah, police armed with weapons of war. Abuse of power, absolutely. Imperialism. Going so fast. I'm so glad they have lots of answers. Let's see. Treating citizens as the enemy. Police adopting inappropriate levels of power in civilian spaces. Heavily armed police officers, yes. War over community, expensive, very, very accurate. Police having a lot of power physically and in the legal system. Excessive and unnecessary force used to keep peace. Police using military techniques and tools against civilians. Yeah, all of these are great examples. Police increasing amount of weapons to intimidate and terrorize civilians. Yeah. Police treating citizens as enemy and becoming part of the military industrial complex. So I'm seeing a lot of really overlapping themes here, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about is exactly what you're writing here. Using military style surveillance, again, very much covering some of the stuff that we will be talking about. Let me lower my chat. So last is just a simple one. Have you signed our petition? Have you heard about our petition? So, and if you haven't, go ahead. I see some people have, oh, not yet. So no, but like to. So knowing that you have not, Christine has dropped in the chat the link to sign the petition. And Christine, go ahead and paste that in as often as you need so that folks can get the opportunity to sign that petition. It'll take you all of 15 seconds to do it. And before we actually get started, I just wanted to make sure, I know maybe you've already saw this in other presentations here today, but I wanted to remind folks, we're going to be using the raised hand function when we go into our breakouts. So if you've never seen that before, if you look at the bar, you'll see the bar at the bottom, you'll see where it says mute and stop video, you'll see a little thing that says participants. There will be a blue button that you can raise your hand. So go ahead and keep that in mind whenever we go into our breakout groups later. But that should be it. So I'm going to kick it off to Dan.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal, for getting us started. So just to give folks a little bit of context, we're going to provide a little bit of background about the history of police militarization, and which it's been a long history of ineffectiveness and abuse. Police militarization is something that's greatly concerning to me, having been through military training as a veteran and spending time in war, and seeing the impact that that has on the populations that are forced to undergo occupation, the dehumanization that happens, as well as the impacts that happen to the mindsets of those who undergo such militarized trainings. I think whether it be veterans of war or police in, operating in an occupation capacity, the rates of domestic violence, the rates of abuse, the rates of mental health concerns are something that, when those are the people who have weapons in our communities, is something that is a major concern. And it's something that's getting increasing attention, which we've seen a lot of over the past year or so. So in the year of 2020, we saw a real powerful uprising against racial injustice, police brutality. An estimated 26 million people, both in urban and in rural communities, took to the streets to proclaim that Black Lives Matter and demand some accountability from the police. One of the things that doesn't often get enough attention is how training can contribute to police tactics and abuse and undermine accountability. And so our campaign of Demilitarize PGH is in alignment with those demands of the movement for Black Lives. And so we seek to end militarized police trainings, specifically those led by Israeli government agencies and nonprofit organizations in which our local, state, and federal law enforcement authorities are engaging in violent and oppressive tactics and learning alongside and exchanging practices with the Israeli military. Joe, if you can go to the next slide, please. So the militarization of police really began back in the 1960s. And at first it was a response to various bank robberies in Philadelphia, as well as a sniper attack in Austin, Texas. However, that quickly changed from such dire circumstances, and specifically in Los Angeles Police Department, they began utilizing SWAT teams to respond to public unrest and especially to brutally suppress the Black Panthers. If you're not familiar with the acronym of SWAT, the acronym SWAT originally was Special Weapons Assault Teams, and then later began to shift to the term of Special Weapons and Tactics. But I would say that the Special Weapons Assault Teams is a little bit more of an accurate description when you look at the impact that they have, the techniques and the tactics that they use. The first raid by SWAT teams specifically to execute search warrants, which is often how they are used now, was actually in 1969 against the Black Panthers. And then Fred Hampton in 1969 was murdered in Chicago in another such raid. So police militarization was also evident in the bombing of the MOVE compound in Philadelphia in 1985. If you're not familiar with the bombing of the MOVE compound, I would recommend you take some time to Google that. It's a shocking story. And then with the war on drugs, we saw an additional proliferation of SWAT teams being used by US police departments to aggressively target communities of color in the name of drug trafficking control. In 1997, this militarization push saw another increase when Bill Clinton basically started the process of taking equipment from the military and shifting some of that surplus equipment directly to law enforcement agencies. And so since that practice began in 1997, over 7 billion worth of military grade equipment has gone to 8,000 local law enforcement agencies. That bill, if people are curious about what it is HR 3230, the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 1997. In the section 1033, which is often referenced, is the section that specifically allocates that military surplus equipment going to law enforcement agencies. And if you take a look at the bullet points that we've got to the right of the slide that's currently showing, we'll see an example of what kind of equipment we're talking about. Since between 2006 and 2014, over 600 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles have gone to law enforcement police agencies, so the equivalent of tanks, essentially. Almost 80,000 assault rifles, 205 grenade launchers, almost 12,000 bayonets, 50 airplanes, 422 helicopters. Why law enforcement agencies, why police agencies would need a grenade launcher is beyond me. And so I think we can see why this type of shift of technology and equipment from the military to police agencies can absolutely spell no good. Joe, if you could go to the next slide. So militarized police don't make us safer, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. By some estimates, a community whose local law enforcement agency receives military equipment will see civilian deaths increase by as much as 129%. And in 2018, a study that said that 9,000 of the 15,000 or so law enforcement agencies had SWAT units. So this is something that's very common, not just in big cities. It's becoming standard practice to have these militarized forces enforcing the law, serving warrants, and being involved in drug traffic control. Joe, next slide, please. A big takeaway is that these militarized police, these SWAT units, and the use of military technology and techniques is typically overused, unaccountable, and overly aggressive. Next slide, please, Joe. When we say that they're overused, we talk about something that I mentioned earlier, which is that SWAT teams were initially developed to barricade people with weapons or for hostage crisis. This is according to Frederick Lemieux, a criminologist from Georgetown University. But now they've started to trickle down to much more ordinary operations like drug busts and patrolling areas with high concentration of crime. Part of that section 1033 basically stipulates that police have to demonstrate that they use and need such technology in order to maintain them. So it's one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so they're looking for opportunities to demonstrate that they use it and therefore can retain it. This is when you've got police that are looking for excuses to use such military technology, that can only spell disaster. That is how these militarized police teams continue to be so overused. Next slide, please, Joe. Militarized police are also unaccountable. So a lot of critics argue that police militarization preferentially targets communities of color, especially in the wake of the uprisings in Ferguson and the various Black Lives Matter movements and protests. But when people try to actually pinpoint this, often it's very difficult to prove it. And that's simply because the police departments are not generating data. And so Jonathan Momola from Princeton University basically tried to be able to prove that this is disproportionately impacting communities of color, and was unable to do so because of the lack of transparency around the use of these units. He said there's not a lot of data readily available, and in many cases, depending on which type of agencies you're studying, there may not be any data that exists at all. And so some of those technologies and equipments are being given to police agencies without any expectation to document how they're being used, and that's a really dangerous trend. Joe, if you can go to the next slide, please. And importantly, I mean, it goes with, you'd think it would go without saying, but these militarized police are obviously over aggressive. And so, you know, a lot of law enforcement agencies are basically practicing SWAT raids on low-level drug offenses, just as a matter of getting practice with those techniques and getting practice with that equipment. This is a recipe for disaster, when basically you're giving assault rifles for the purposes of learning to use assault rifles on low-level offenses. It's really when we talk about militarized training, we talk about the use of force to solve problems, which is really an inherent problem in much of American policing, but particularly when it's explicitly militarized, it leads to a lot of some of the things that we see and read about in the news far too often, unfortunately. Joe, if you can go to the next slide. And so I'm reminded of the quote from Abraham Maslow, who studied human behavior and psychology, who said, "I suppose it is tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it were a nail." So apply that type of thinking to, you know, if the tool that you have is an assault weapon, or heaven forbid, a grenade launcher, what are the impacts of that? And Joe, if you can move to the next slide. And so what we're about to demonstrate through some of the documentation that we've been able to cover, these exchange programs between the US police and Israel are making militarization worse. And so at this point, I'll turn this over to my friend and colleague, Darnika, to continue to talk about specifically these exchanges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. So these exchanges are framed as opportunities to learn from Israeli expertise. But what tips and lessons are US cops, ICE agents, and Border Patrol really learning and sharing with occupation forces? The anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and anti-Black policies escalating in the Trump era have their roots in long-standing US and Israeli policy. The enactors of these oppressive policies are literally collaborating and learning from one another. So an example is the apartheid wall in Israel inspired Trump's border wall. So that's why we're working to end these harmful exchanges to stop both countries from legitimizing for one another the racist state violence that is embedded in their military and police culture. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So while these joint training programs continue to take place, the militarized and racist tactics learned by US forces are used in our schools. So as far as when we talk about like police and schools, I actually worked with the coalition to pressure the Woodland Hills School District for several years. And in 2020, they finally decided to not renew their police contracts and will no longer use law enforcement agents to discipline students at school or patrol school grounds. So I'm a parent in Woodland Hills School District, and in 2016, my school district, it was in the headlines for an abusive principal who threatened a student. A few months later, a police officer brutally assaulted a student. And so I started organizing protests. Eventually we got them out, but it took a very long time to get them out of the school district, even though, you know, there was plenty of evidence that the officer was brutalizing students. Next slide, please. Children in Palestine are tried in adult military courts, and in both countries, Black and Palestinian youth are locked up for typical youth behavior. Because of this and other parallels in their respective struggles for justice, solidarity between Black Americans and Palestinians has been building for decades and is critical to the success of both movements. Next slide, please, Joe. I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Donnie.
Thanks, Darnika. So these programs, they're meant for high-ranking police officers and other law enforcement officials, primarily police chiefs, ICE agents, U.S. air marshals, criminal investigators with the Navy, Homeland Security directors, Customs and Border Control agents, as well as agents with the FBI. Reaching the decision makers of these agencies, organizers of the exchanges ensure that the tactics, technologies, and lessons learned are integrated into the agency's everyday operations. Our campaign learned that Pittsburgh Police, including Chief of Police Scott Schubert and Assistant Chief of Police Anna Kudrov, have participated in exchanges in 2004, 2017, 2018, and 2019, with the police chief and assistant chief participating in the most recent exchange program. Other local departments such as the Mount Lebanon Police and the Pennsylvania State Troopers have attended as well. Next slide. So Israel markets itself as a counterterrorism expert of the world, with a security infrastructure and industry that capitalizes on its ample experience in suppressing political dissent and enforcing a brutal military occupation. Israel is an occupying power exerting control over Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Israel consistently violates international human rights law, including the imprisonment of children, administrative detention without charge, and is a leader in inhumane practices used to control crowds such as skunk water, tear gas, and rubber-coated bullets. Israel has the 4th largest army in the world per capita and one of the world's largest defense industries. Israel has turned all of historic Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, and 1948 Israel into a testing ground for military technologies while constantly violating international human rights law and profiting off its criminal enterprise. So Bill Peduto has defended these exchange programs when he was called out over the summer for participating in them. He insists that the trainings deal with counterterrorism and do not inform daily policing. However, Stephen Pomerantz, an architect of the trainings, brags that trip participants who have discussed efforts to build trust with minority communities, indicating that the focus of these trainings is on minority communities rather than on the source of our threat, white supremacist actors. We know that the threat of terrorism in this country comes from far-right white supremacist groups. So SWAT teams are most commonly not used in terrorist situations, in fact. And in Maryland, which is the only state to keep statistics on this, from 2011 to 2014, 92% of 8 million, I think it's 8,200 SWAT deployments were for search warrants, with only 5% of them for barricades, which means that this is not really counterterrorism training. It's being used against the communities, specifically minority communities. So we have other work to do, other ways to address terrorism. But it's really important that we push back against our mayor in insisting that these trainings are going to help control white supremacist terror. And I think we know that all too well here in Pittsburgh. Joe, the next slide. And from this chart, we just want to share the various kind of threads that connect by way of these exchange programs. And this isn't to say that it's the Israeli military or the Israeli government that is influencing the US and is responsible for all these years of bad policy making. Certainly the United States and US police know how to be racist and violent without Israel's help. The case we are trying to make is simply that the communities in both countries do not benefit from these trainings. In fact, they are hurting us. So it is a two-way exchange, with both countries sharing resources and rhetoric that is harmful to minority populations, as I said, and those in vulnerable positions such as refugees and migrants, especially people of color. The core shared values here that are being exchanged are Islamophobia and white supremacy. All right, I'm going to kick it back to Crystal now for our activity.
Yeah, so I know not everybody was here whenever we first went over these, so I just want to remind everybody about our community agreements before we go into our breakouts. So again, step up, step back. If you are someone who typically waits for others to speak up first, push yourself, challenge yourself to share your thoughts or your questions here with us. And again, if it's the easiest thing in the world for you to speak up in groups, and you notice that you are speaking more than others, take a moment to step back to let those folks who need to step up get that opportunity. One diva, one mic, very simple. Let's not talk over one another. Let someone finish their thought. But in order to do that, Community Agreement 3, one of my favorites, is to land the plane. Landing the plane just means that you wrap up your thought. It's sometimes difficult to figure out the best way to, so sometimes I will say the end or I'm done. That moves you along. Number 4 is power is always at play. So even again here in this summit, with everything that we're learning today, we know that power is always leaning towards white and male and cis and able-bodied. So we're going to do our best to use a progressive stack to highlight the voices of people of color, non-binary or femme folks. Again, you can also, if you haven't already done this, add your pronouns to your names. I would hope that you all will feel comfortable sharing your pronouns with us so that we can all be respectful in our small breakout rooms. And lastly, again, we are asking for everybody to understand our facilitator call-in and redirection. We have a very specific argument that we're making and we're laying out here today. So if we feel that you are steering us off that from what we're talking about, if you're moving away from the spirit of this presentation, we're gonna respectfully interrupt you and redirect us back to what we're trying to achieve here. So next slide, please, if I can open it myself. So what we're going to do in these breakout groups, we are going to have 2 headlines, and we're going to go through some of these questions together, 2 headlines and 2 images. And they're really just about like how they make you feel, like questions about like how did this personally affect you, to like who is made safe in these images, or who benefits from this. So, and keep in mind, we're going to do this for 10 minutes in our breakout groups. And then when we come back to the main group, the main room, we're going to report back. So one person in each group should volunteer to be the person who reports back to the main group. And again, these are opinion questions. There are no right or wrong answers about how you feel about the images. So I think we're good to go into our breakout groups.
So now we're going to have each group share a quick highlight about these articles that we looked at. Joe, you can go into the next slide, and breakout group number 1 was with me, and Peter is going to share a couple of notes from our conversation.
Right. Well, there were a couple of different reactions, but parallel, related. One was some of us were outraged and appalled by what we're looking at, and emphasized the need to think about action, that the people speaking out were not a threat. And yet, at the same time, and this is not really a contradiction, there is a perception of Black people as a threat. And in a sense, the protesters did represent a threat to white supremacy and anti-Black racist perceptions. But it was also said that there's something of value extraordinary in the photo, that the protesters looked powerful. There's a show of strength that's positive. In contrast to a headline which is frustrating and reveals the ongoing problem of murders without any significant change being made ever.
Thanks. Let's look at the next one, Joe.
And we didn't spend as much time on this, but there was general agreement, I think, that the headline, like the headline in the previous slide, the headline is emphasizing the reaction to the injustice that's been committed. So in the first slide, the emphasis was on protest. Here it's on revenge, moving the reader away from the justice that has been committed. And in thinking about who could possibly benefit from this tragedy, the reaction was the occupiers, those benefiting from repression. And that's my report.
Okay, Joe, next one.
Okay, this was my slide. We didn't get to, is there anyone from my group who would like to talk about this one?
I jotted down a few things.
Okay.
That it assumes that there'll be violent problems in the schools instead of the administrators or the teachers talking it out. That people of color, like in the rest of the culture, would get the worst of it, having these officers there. That it doesn't end school shootings, not the same as other types of reform, gun reform and others. And wondering what is the training that the police are getting, or are they just sent in there with the same mindset as they have when they're out on patrol? That's what I got down.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, so the next slide, we actually didn't get to really talk about. So we can open this one up to the floor, Joe.
Or rather move on.
Yeah, we can move on, that's fine.
For time's sake.
Yeah.
All right, so our group, when we talked about this, we discussed kind of how it made us feel. You know, well, first of all, it was confusing because there's like this peaceful group of people protesting, and then it's talking about panic, violence, and bloodshed. And so, you know, we found it to be confusing and basically thought that it was making it confusing enough in a way that you could read it however you wanted to read it. That if you were pro Black Lives Matter, pro we should be protesting the police's response to this, then it looks like awesome, Pittsburgh is, you know, going after the police in response to the way they're handling the protests. If you are trying to not read it in the positive light, it looks like there was panic, violence, and bloodshed at these protests. And even still, the Pittsburgh people are going after the police in response to those protests. We said that it could, you know, that it made certain groups feel powerful, seeing the community response pouring out, and then other groups could certainly see this as a threat. The people who want white supremacy to continue, this could be a very threatening picture to them. And that this has kind of the ability to increase hate.
And we also weren't able to get to our second one, but I just thought it'd be great for y'all to read this one. And thank you so much, Sarah, for reporting back. Next slide is good.
Hey, this is Dan. I facilitated group 2. Unfortunately, we got cut off before we got to choose a presenter. One of the things that I thought was important to name was I was really appreciating that one of our participants shared that, you know, as a person of color, this is a topic that they're confronted with often, and that can be traumatizing and triggering and takes a lot of emotional labor. And so actually that participant decided to step back from the conversation, was glad the conversation happened. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that being confronted with this over and over and over again, even in settings such as this, does take emotional labor and something to name. I also wanted to, something that came up that I thought was really important was the intersection between some of these issues and also disability justice. If the person who named that intersection wanted to come off mute and talk about it, they can. Otherwise, I'm willing to. Not hearing that person pipe up, I'll just basically said that, this person named that disability justice is very much interconnected with some of these things. You know, Jacob Blake is facing some major physical challenges moving forward as a result of this, which is often something that happens in terms of the IDF's treatment of the people of Palestine. The IDF will often shoot to wound, shoot to paralyze. And so a lot of the people of Palestine, through their interactions with the IDF, are permanently disabled, permanently struggling with additional challenges, and that's done on purpose. This is also something that we see a lot in communities that are over-policed and overly faced with the aggressive and militarized police tactics that led to the shooting of Jacob Blake in the back 7 times. That's so unless I'm missing out on something, I think we could move on to the next slide. And this is something that we did not really discuss, but just talking about, you know, I think one of the things that jumps out to me is the difference in terms of protests based on who it is that is protesting. And I think in terms of the aggressiveness of police response, I would say that, like, this is something that we've seen here locally and has made quite national headlines when you compare when there's white supremacists storming the Capitol and being treated with kid gloves versus some very peaceful protests that are often met with police violence, shootings, and militarized response.
Hi, this is Emily. I was the facilitator for this group. And our group was a little wonky because I didn't know how to access the slides till about halfway through the breakout. But Maya has offered to do a report out. So thank you, Maya.
Absolutely, thank you. So yeah, like Emily said, we didn't have too much time to discuss these, but with this image in particular and the headline, one of our group members brought up, oh, sorry, I can read it. Thank you, Dana. Police militarization fails to protect officers and targets Black communities, study finds. And then the image is a young Black woman being arrested by 3 clearly militarized police officers with a line of other militarized police officers behind them, while she is standing mostly alone with people only in the far distance. And what was brought up with this image in our group, similar to what was echoed with the last headline, is that there is a huge disparity in the types of action and how disproportionate it can be. And that when it comes to a completely peaceful protest with unarmed individuals expressing their own civil liberties, they can be met with what is genuinely terrifying amounts of police officers with heavy militarization, whereas you can have an armed insurrection at the Capitol, which is not only allowed to occur by some police officers and some forces, but also assisted. And then this one, unfortunately, we weren't really able to discuss because of the time constraints, but Emily did give us some of the context behind this, that this paramedic was killed as what was claimed to be sort of a byproduct of violence as a collateral. And that the article, which reads, New York Times report on killing of Gaza paramedic Rizan al-Nahar, I apologize if I mispronounce that name, is a big step forward, though flawed. And the context behind that is that reports are not normally given on those sorts of casualties, on what is considered to be a collateral damage, which is really a great injustice. And I think the image is really stark. And we drew the comparison between what we're seeing as far as violence in the US and what we have seen of completely innocent people being targeted when truly they should never be the subjects of violence, and how unfortunate and unjust that can be.
Thanks, Maya.
Before we move to the next couple slides, I want to thank Maya for reading the headlines and describing the images, which some of us neglected to do, but just in case there are people with us who are not seeing the screen or not able to read, as we move forward to group 6, when you share your notes, please read the headline and describe the image. Thanks.
Okay, everybody, so this group is my group, and Bob is going to be the one coming back and talking about the insights and the discussions we had. So go ahead, Bob, I'll let you go from there.
Thank you, Christine. So the image is of half a dozen what look like maybe junior high or high school students sitting in a roadway and looking really quite peaceful. And in front of them are maybe 30 or 40 police in tactical gear with big batons in a very threatening posture. And the headline is, Police do not belong in our schools. Students are demanding an end to campus cops after the death of George Floyd. And some of the reactions were that it was striking to one particular individual that it would depend on where you grew up and what school you went to in terms of police presence in your school, and how that's a different experience of what it means to be safe. Another person talked about viewing this image and the sadness that they felt, and noticing that the police really were exhibiting violence and bullying, and what a horrible way to try to resolve conflict or issues, obviously not what is needed. So those were some of the reactions to that particular image and the headline. And then we did have a chance to view this second one. And again, I'll describe this. The headline is Israeli police killing of Palestinian leads to apologies and echo of the US. So there is a young boy, and I'm guessing he's Palestinian. It says, "We will return," his handmade sign. And then in a bigger sign next to him with Arabic script above both heads, and then English below. One is a depiction of George Floyd, African-American, killed by US police, and Iyad al-Halak, Palestinian with autism, killed by Israeli police. And then the caption below is, "From the USA to Palestine, racism is a crime." And so again, some of the reactions were sadness. One person said they really hadn't thought about this connection between people of color in this country and Palestinians being treated the same in Israel-Palestine. And also another person pointed out that a lot of violence actually takes place in silence. Only in high-profile cases like George Floyd, like Iyad, are we made aware of it, but there are many other experiences of violence and killings, and this person implied really that obviously this is a systemic issue. It's not isolated, high-profile oppression.
Okay, so I facilitated this group and we did not have any volunteers to report back, so I will do it. The headline is "Some PA schools prepare resource officers with basic training, but it isn't mandatory." And the image is a policeman conducting a training in school with his hands up. And what we had to say about this is that it was alarming not to have some mandatory training, especially given that it's basic. So the fact that the bare minimum is not even mandatory seems like a huge problem. And then we talked about how most school shootings occur in primarily white schools, and the increase in policing negatively affects primarily Black schools. So people in white neighborhoods call for increase of police in schools, and they don't typically see the downsides of it. And with that, that's the end of our activity. We will go to Dan, who's going to talk about what the participants in these trainings have to say about it.
So as we've discussed, a lot of the issues with policing is often a lack of transparency in order to actually be accountable and hold the police accountable. So one of the ways in which we can determine the impact of these trainings is to actually look at the words of those who participate in the trainings. And so I'm going to ask Joe to go to the next slide and get the direct words coming from Boston Police Commissioner William Evans upon participating in these trainings. He said, "Israel is without a doubt one of the best. Just how they process these scenes so quickly and get them back to normal. The surveillance, the behavioral science in which people in watching people as they pass checkpoints. Unfortunately, the history and the tragedies here have made them what people look for, and that is the model to prevent terrorism." And so this is chief of a major American city saying that the IDF are the model of preventing terrorism, and the behavioral science that they're referencing is, in essence, very much based on racial profiling. I'll pass it over to Donnie now.
Thanks. So David Friedman, the Director of National Law Enforcement Initiatives and Washington, D.C. Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, which is one of the nonprofits that actually runs these exchanges, in 2015 said, "The meetings serve to build bridges between, quote, law enforcement agencies in two democracies, and officers who take part in visits of this sort come back and they are Zionists. They understand Israel and its security needs in ways a lot of audiences don't." Meaning these exchanges serve a political purpose as well as their explicit training purpose. They are meant to shore up support in the US for Zionism and Israeli policy. While Israel is often lauded for being a democracy in the Middle East, or often called the only democracy in the Middle East, with West Bank and East Jerusalem under occupation for over 50 years and unable to vote, the term democracy must be understood in a more critical and nuanced way when applied to Israel. Huge portions of the population in the region are disenfranchised, and these are the people that control and surveillance technology are being tested on. Next one, Darnika.
Okay. So here we have a quote from Colonel Robert Williams, the chief of the Maine State Police in 2013. And he says, "In the old city of Jerusalem, they have a system of 200 cameras," Williams said, describing the surveillance system as high tech. "In the old part of the city, they can follow you anywhere." He later added, "It was like Star Wars compared to what we do." So a system of 200 cameras in a tiny neighborhood of Jerusalem is the model. Do we want to live in a world of constant surveillance? Next slide, please. Okay, so what do our police say? Pittsburgh police have participated in 4 exchanges, one in 2004, 2017, 2018, and 2019. This participation has included the chief of police, assistant chief, and other officers was undertaken together with other local police, which is Mount Lebanon Police. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this slide, we have Anna Kudrov, the Assistant Chief of Pittsburgh Police in 2017. Her quote was, "I'm excited to experience new and different perspectives on law enforcement and to learn how much we have in common protecting and serving our communities." And I'll kick it over to Dan.
And so here we have a quote coming from the Pittsburgh Chief of Police himself, Scott Schubert, saying, "I am most looking forward to learning how Israel deals with the constant threat of terrorism and how they use intelligence to predict and deter attacks. I'm also looking forward to learning about local policing initiatives." And so basically, you know, using the techniques and the tactics of the IDF to better inform, this is straight from the chief, better inform local policing initiatives. And so that's a scary thought. I'll pass it along to the next slide now. So why is this policing so harmful? The US holds only 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. And over the past 5 decades, more than 800,000 Palestinians have been imprisoned or detained by Israel, equivalent to about 40% of the Palestinian territory's male population. And so this over-policing, this imprisonment is something that, you know, can only lead to exacerbation through these training exchanges. And, you know, using the name of counterterrorism and security, that's something that has been used to really disrupt, dismantle a lot of the infrastructures around Muslim populations and around the Black community. Because if you remember what we spoke about at the very beginning, you know, SWAT teams and militarized police were initially really ramped up in an effort to suppress and destroy the Black Panthers. We'll go to the next slide, please. And we'll pass it to Donnie.
Thanks, Dan. So the idea that security for some communities requires violence against others, I hope we all know is a deadly falsehood that underpins the policies of both the US and Israeli governments. We know that broken windows policing, stop and frisk, and the surveillance and entrapment of Muslim communities are not keeping us safer. And we know that we need prison reform or abolition and safe and fair pathways to immigration and refugee status, and a process of restorative justice that focuses on education, treatment, and rehabilitation. We need police that are more accountable to the community, not less. So these trainings that we really don't get a lot of information about certainly don't add up to much accountability from the community. Crystal, you'll be doing the next slide.
We just wanted to let you know what our opinion about is that what makes us safe, and it's that our campaign works from an abolitionist framework, and we believe that a world where community health, housing, and education are funding makes us safer. Ending these exchanges is the first step to defunding the police. And next slide, please. So what has the National Deadly Exchange achieved so far? So like we've explained, this is a national campaign, but you know, we're working here locally here in Pittsburgh, but it was April 16th in 2018, where Durham City Council passed a resolution outlawing the collaboration and the training between the police department and the Israeli Defense Forces. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, that's me. This is just a legislation, and the most important part is neither enter into nor continue any training programs, exchanges, or partnerships with the Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli intelligence and security services, and/or the police. Kick it to Darnika.
Okay, so Durham actually, activists in Durham built a coalition very similar to our own. made up of local groups that had been working separately for years on opposing the Israeli occupation, police brutality in Durham, and human rights abuses at home and abroad. So they named their coalition Demilitarize Durham to Palestine Coalition. And some of the organizations that were a part of that were Jewish Voice for Peace, Triangle Chapter in North Carolina, and Muslims for Social Justice. Next slide, please. They began their campaign by writing a petition to their city council calling for a resolution to outlaw police exchanges with the IDF. Through canvassing, phone banking, and a social media campaign, they were able to get over 1,000 signatures from Durham voters. During this time, they also sought endorsements of the campaign and coalition from additional community organizations. After building support through petition canvassing, community endorsements, and teach-ins, the coalition began to approach city councilors and city council candidates. They found an ally in the mayor and were able to work with him to introduce a resolution to the Durham City Council. As this was happening, they continued to push the petition, host teach-ins, gathered additional endorsements. They turned out supporters to the city council meetings in which the resolution was introduced and the meeting in which it was voted on. The Demilitarized Coalition also had a strong media plan, which involved a proactive engagement of the press through press releases, visually engaging street education demonstrations, and planned responses to likely backlash from Zionist and right-wing and white supremacist groups.
Thanks, Darnika. So here in Pittsburgh, we have a similar coalition, and we're made up of groups who focus on justice in Israel, Palestine, and right here in Pittsburgh. And we work on demilitarization, racial justice, human rights, and Palestinian solidarity. And the current members of the coalition are the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE Pittsburgh, Democratic Socialists of America, Pittsburgh, Friends of Sabeel North America, Pittsburgh, Jewish Voice for Peace, Pittsburgh, Thomas Merton Center, Trans Uniting, and Veterans for Peace of Western Pennsylvania. Crystal.
So like I mentioned in the beginning, the most important thing to take away is how can you get involved with this? So some of the easiest things that you can do is signal boost. You know you're on Facebook. I mean, at least I'm sure a lot of you are. So look us up, the Coalition to End the Deadly Exchange. Like our page, share our page, invite friends to look at our page, share a post. Like you already did right now, hopefully you signed our petition. Again, click on that link, it'll take you 2 seconds. And when it gets warmer, we're gonna wanna table and use COVID-19 safety precautions with masks and social distancing, but we wanna also reach a really high number here in Pittsburgh on our petition. We also have we want folks to volunteer for a working group. You know, we need a proposed resolution of our own. With Durham, we already have most of the work already cut out for us, right? We have legislation that we can model, but we need to work to work with us here in Pittsburgh. And you don't have to have legislative expertise or experience. I certainly haven't had any experience writing any laws, but it's one of the ways that we're gonna show the seriousness of our campaign to City Council. And another thing that really helps is endorsing the campaign. Are you part of a union, a school organization, a faith community? Get your community organizations to endorse the campaign, and that just makes us stronger to show our solidarity. And again, one of the best ways to actually get an endorsement is organize a teach-in of your own. We can help you, we can support you with doing that. It would be exactly what you all did today with us. We would send y'all the links for the slide itself, and maybe a couple of us can help with that. Certainly, probably all of our schedules wouldn't work so that we could all do it, but we can definitely try to see if we can get 1 or 2 people to help you with that. And again, if any experience or interest with, writing legislation, lobbying, social media, or press, that's something that we always want help with. Just mentioning again, things that you can do right now is signing the petition if you hadn't already. Next slide, please. But the thing that you can do right after the summit, once you're done, is call city council, call the mayor, ask them, are they aware? Tell them specifically that you're here at the summit and that you heard our teaching, and you want to know if in 2020, our police was involved with one of these exchanges. And if you don't live in the city, we got county council as well that we need to call them, because we know, again, these exchanges aren't just happening in Pittsburgh, they've happened in Moon as well. So, and they're happening all across the state. So definitely check out county council as well. But that's something that you can do today when you're done with the summit. But in the future, we definitely have one more opportunity for you to get involved. We have a phone bank, and Emily will be dropping a little Word doc in the chat for y'all to see the different ways to get involved. So there's the Thomas Merton Center is going to be hosting a phone bank on February 2nd at 5 o'clock. Please join us. We're going to be calling members of the Thomas Merton Center, and those are definitely folks who are on board, but maybe not all of them have actually signed the petition. So we already have about 5 or 7 people signed up. The more folks that sign up, the quicker it goes. It'll be one of the easier phone bank experiences that you might have had. So we just want to end it. We're going to go to questions, but we want to end it with the idea that we will defend each other. We know that our safety is only going to be found through solidarity. So I know we have questions. And Yusuf, you have your hand raised?
Yes, ma'am. I have 2 questions. One, can I get a copy of the recording? And 2, is there a listing of all the contacts that they are having across the country? So I can see, are there any other cities that I have people that I'm working with that are having this Israeli police contact, so I could weigh in?
Yes, we can get you a list, and yeah, the recordings will be available.
Thank you.
Oh, and let's see. Let me open up my chat. Oh, and a phone bank is just when we call a list of folks, and what we'll be doing is sharing the petition link with them and getting them to sign. And it's just a simple thing where we enter in their email information into the petition link for them. So that's what a phone bank is. Trying to look through to see if I can find any more questions. And I'm going to also, again, this is the link that I'm dropping right now, is to a Google Doc where you can see all of these ways to get involved. Planning on, as of right now, we don't have physical events that we're doing. The first event that we're going to be doing right after this is the phone bank. So we would love for you to join us there, but we would definitely want to have more once, things get warmer, for sure. Do all Pittsburgh public schools have police patrols? Darnika, do you want to take that one?
I'll answer that one. Usually, well, they have their own school police. They're unarmed, but they're usually not stationed in a school. They usually have just the school security guards. So if there's some sort of issue where a teacher is calling for a police officer or something like that, it's usually there's they're supposed to be calling school police, but sometimes also Pittsburgh police will be called to the school. So they do have their own police force. It's Gateway is another school district that does, but they're armed in Gateway.
Thanks, Darnika.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts from today's session or questions?
Crystal, I noticed one of the questions in the chat from Maya about doing our part to unwrite the propaganda of what makes people think that military actions of Israel and our own police count as justified. Do you mind if I just speak to that real quick?
Please.
Yeah, so one of the things that they've seen is that the militarization of police, there's been no documented evidence that militarization of police helps to keep police officers safer. And also just if you look at if there's a perception of like, well, this is going to help to keep, this, like the police need this and the ability to exercise this discretion, this is good for police. If you look at just, as I referenced earlier, the outcomes in terms of, mental health, in terms of incidents of abuse, the more militarized a person's training is, the higher prevalence there are to worse outcomes in terms of personal impact and family sustainability. So if anyone is trying to argue that the impact of military training is going to positively benefit police or their communities, there's just no evidence to support that.
Thank you, Dan.
Just another plug for the phone bank. I'm pasting a sign-up link in the chat where you can register for the phone banking if you haven't done so.
Yeah, phone banking is a super easy way to get involved. And it's another way that we can build up our petition. And I will be training y'all so you can see that it's a simple thing to do.
Hey, this is Dustin. I just have one question. Are you all doing anything to, I guess, support or be in solidarity with Palestinians? And do you know like any entry points into that type of work? And I'm thinking about BDS specifically, but then there's other things that you might know of.
So as a coalition, we do what we can to kind of uplift the Palestinian struggle through our social media channels, and also support local groups like Students for Justice in Palestine when they need us, when they need our support. I think as Jewish Voice for Peace, I can speak for our own organization. Our national mission is in full support of the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, which is a targeted way of pressuring Israel to end the occupation and allow Palestinians to live their lives freely and with self-determination. We are a pretty small organization lately, so we don't have a ton of resources to promote BDS, but it is something that we definitely focus on. And as far as the other organizations in the coalition, I'll give the rest of you guys a chance to say something about this if you like. I don't know if there's anyone on the call from Friends of Sabeel North America, but they're specifically a Palestinian organization that also promotes BDS.
And yeah, I can also, in fact, we have a slide that we skipped over due to time, slide 52, referencing like our previous work in getting Mike Doyle to co-sponsor a bill to prevent US tax dollars from funding the imprisonment of Palestinian children. So whenever we can try to publicize legislation that would, stop the American funding of such human rights abuses. That's work that we've done in the past and would do again in the future when an opportunity arises.
Peter, did you?
Yeah,
want to
I'm actually a member of Friends of Sabeel North America. Sabeel is the Center for Palestinian Liberation Theology in Palestine. Friends of Sabeel North America, you know, we take our lead kind of from Sabeel and Palestine, but also work to promote the idea of BDS and justice for Palestinians, particularly within faith communities, right? So in the recent past, kind of pre-COVID, we had a Palestinian film festival going and looked for other creative means to bring to greater public awareness the issue of BDS and Palestinian rights.
Hello, this is Joe with Pittsburgh DSA. At our convention in 2019, we actually established a national working group around BDS and Palestinian solidarity. And we're actually having a national discussion for that on February 6th. I'll drop the link real quick in the chat. Thanks.
I'll also just plug Jewish Voice for Peace Pittsburgh's Facebook page in the chat here. Our other coalition members, feel free to do the same. But if you follow our Facebook page, we do regularly post about current events in Palestine. And whenever there's an opportunity to support Palestinians, we will share it there.
Donnie?
We've got just a minute left. What's that, Bob?
Yeah, so just because there's silence, I'll just mention another initiative of Jewish Voice for Peace is to oppose the inaccurate definition of anti-Semitism as being anti-Israel. In other words, if people are critical of Israel, that's equated with being anti-Semitic, and that's totally inaccurate. And Jewish Voice for Peace is very aggressive in a good way in opposing legislation, both federal and state, that supports that inaccurate definition.
That's right.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that you will make sure to make that call. Please, ask them whether or not, demand an answer, right? Demand to know whether or not they've been doing that here in 2020. Oh, and I see a plug for APA's ballot initiative question. Definitely please do that as well. And it's going fast now, so but thank you all again, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit and sign up to Phone Bank.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Make the call. You can make that call today.